Okay, so let's get into it. We're about to decode a poem that starts with a very real personal tragedy, then morphs into this furious political attack, gets absolutely blasted by one of literature's biggest names, and somehow still ends up as one of the most important poems ever written in English. Yep, we're talking about John Milton's Lycidas.
At its core, this whole thing isn't just about dusty old poetry. It's about something sudden, something real, and something truly tragic. And it all kicks off, as so many devastating stories do, with a catastrophe at sea.
All right, so first up, a friend lost at sea. Before we dive into the kind of weird and beautiful world of the poem itself, we've got to understand the very real loss that sparked the whole thing.
So picture this. It's August 1637. A young, promising scholar named Edward King, a friend of Milton's from their Cambridge days, is on a ship. That ship sinks in the Irish Sea. He drowns. And to make it all so much worse, his body is never found. So his friends from university decide to put together a book of poems to remember him, and a young John Milton submits the poem that would become Lycidas.
And this right here, this is the central puzzle of the whole poem. Milton is dealing with a profound, real-world tragedy. And what does he do? He retreats into this highly artificial, totally fictional world of make-believe. So the big question is, why? And how on earth does that even work?
So how does Milton actually process this grief? Well, that brings us to our second section, Grief in a Shepherd's World. His choice of how to write about it is, well, it's deliberate, and honestly, it's a little strange. He didn't just write a sad poem. He picked a very specific, rule-bound format to do it.
He chose something called the Pastoral Elegy. The best way to think about it is like a movie genre, like a Western or a sci-fi flick. It's got its own rules, its own setting, its own characters. The whole tradition goes way back to ancient Greece, and the main rule is that the poet has to imagine himself and his lost friend as shepherds, living this simple, idyllic life in the countryside. It is, by its very definition, completely artificial.
Now this is cool. This slide is basically our decoder ring for the entire poem. On the left, you've got the pastoral fantasy world, and on the right, you see what it actually stands for. So the shepherds, Lycidas and the narrator, that's really the students, King and Milton. The pastures where they hang out, that's Cambridge University. And when he talks about battening our flocks, he's not talking about sheep. It's a metaphor for their classes and their studies. He even sneaks in their classmates and a favorite professor, disguising them as mythical satyrs and an old shepherd named Demoidas.
But then, the poem takes a shocking turn. Just when you think you've settled into this quiet, sad world of shepherds, Milton just rips the mask off, and the poem's real purpose starts to come out. This is where it gets really interesting.
The speaker's grief starts to curdle into this really profound, angry question. It's a question we still ask today, right? Why do good people suffer? Why was his friend, this dedicated, promising young guy, taken away, while the corrupt and the selfish just seem to thrive? This is the pivot point of the entire poem.
And boom, with that one question, the poem just explodes. It's not just a sad poem for a friend anymore. It becomes this fiery interrogation of everything, the meaning of fame, the justice of God, and, most dangerously of all, the state of the Church of England itself. And this is the moment of pure frustration. You can almost hear him shouting at the universe. He rails against the sheer randomness of death, picturing it as this blind fury with a pair of scissors who just senselessly snips the thread of a young man's life. You can just feel the rage and the helplessness in these lines. And then something totally wild happens. In one of the most stunning moments in all of English poetry, the shepherd's sad song is interrupted by this thunderous, completely unexpected voice. It's St. Peter himself, the rock of the Christian church. And he has not come to offer comfort. He's here to deliver a verdict.
St. Peter basically hijacks the poem and turns this personal elegy into a political weapon. He launches this furious attack on the corrupt clergy of the time, calling them blind mouths, meaning all they do is take and consume, offering no spiritual guidance. And he gives this terrifying warning that a divine reckoning, a mysterious two-handed engine, is coming for them all.
So, just how dangerous were these words? Well, let's put it this way. The attack was so direct, so potent, that after Milton died, the church actually banned the poem for about 20 years. This wasn't just poetry. This was a direct challenge to authority, and it had real-world consequences. But the controversy didn't stop there. Oh no.
Fast forward about 150 years, and one of the absolute titans of English literature, Samuel Johnson, takes aim at Lycidas, and his critique pretty much set the terms of the debate ever since.
This slide just perfectly captures the clash. On one side, you have Milton writing about satyrs and fauns, and then Johnson comes back with this absolutely savage takedown. Where there is leisure for fiction, there is little grief. For Johnson, using this fantasy world wasn't a clever trick. It was proof that Milton wasn't really sad at all. So Johnson's complaints were pretty straightforward. First, he thought the whole shepherd thing was tired and unbelievable. Second, he argued it showed no real passion. But his biggest issue, what he called its grosser fault, was the mixing of pagan myths like Jove with sacred Christian figures. His final verdict was just brutal. He basically said the only reason anyone pretends to like this poem is because the famous John Milton wrote it. Ouch.
So, with a takedown that harsh from a critic that famous, you'd think the poem would just fade away, right? Well, not exactly. This is where we see how Milton brings it all home and locks in the poem's legacy for good. After all that anger, all that doubt, and all that fury, the poem finally finds its resolution. The speaker has a vision of his friend Lycidas. He's not at the bottom of the ocean. He's been resurrected in heaven, transformed into a kind of saint. His death wasn't a meaningless end. It was a transformation. And that grief finally gives way to peace.
And despite Johnson's takedown, the poem's power just endured. Its DNA's woven all through literature. You've probably heard lines from it without even knowing it. Thomas Wolfe's famous novel, Look Homeward Angel, that's a direct quote. Even a dystopian sci-fi novel like The Sheep Look Up borrows its title right from St. Peter's Angry Sermon. Lycidas didn't just survive, it became a source of inspiration.
And it all ends with these beautiful, iconic lines. The shepherd narrator, having worked through all his grief and anger, stands up, he pulls his cloak around him, and he gets ready to move on. He's not forgetting his friend, but he's ready to face a new day, to journey on to fresh woods and pastures new. It's this final, powerful image of resilience, leaving us not with an ending, but with the quiet promise of a new beginning.